Well, I'm glad to see you today. We have tons of material to cover, so we're going to go through as quickly as we can. Let's go ahead and get organized, all right? For materials today, you need a few activities on hand. Activities 2-1, 2-2, and 2-3. Let me just give you the rundown on this real quick. 2-1 is going to be part of your assignment. We've been working on that little by little. And on 2-3, we're going to fill in as much of what applies together, as much as we have time to do on rivers, lakes, and seas. And then 2-3 is for you to fill in during class. It's your tiny tables, and you want to fill in ways to compare rivers, types of wetlands, and forces of change. All right, so be listening for those things today and fill in those tables as you listen. On the agenda, first we're going to review by identifying landforms, and then we'll be talking about major bodies of water and working on our statistical highlights activity sheet as much as we have time for. Our main idea today is that major bodies of water on the Earth's surface include rivers, lakes, and seas. So that's pretty simple, something you already knew about. Your goals today, you need to distinguish 3 ways to compare rivers. That is by length, discharge, and drainage. Those are the basic ways. Also, know the 3 types of wetlands, bog, marsh, and swamp. And explain the importance of rivers, lakes, and seas in human civilizations. And these have a strong effect, much as did the landforms that we studied previously. Now let's go ahead and quickly get started by looking at our chapter verse together. Go ahead and read this with me. 2 Peter 3:5-7. For this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. But the heavens and the earth which are now, by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. Okay, we're going to start out with our review. I'm going to show you some photos, and you need to identify whether the photo is a mountain, plain, or plateau. It's pretty easy. So, start out with the top left, plains. Right, that's a plateau. You can see the canyon cutting through it. Bottom left, more plains, a little bit of a hill in the background. And bottom right, easily mountains. A few more. Top left, plains. Top right, mountains. Bottom left, that one could be a little trickier, couldn't it? Mountains in the background, you might have thought of rolling plains there in the forefront. And bottom right, another plateau. Also, for part of your assignment, your section review, you were to make a chart of the Earth's land features. So I want to take a moment to go ahead and look at those features. This is the chart that I made just to give you an idea. I'm not going to look real closely at it, but just to show you how I set it up. Continent, mountains, plains, and plateaus. Some of them didn't show anything on our map. Some of the other ones that I've filled in, there was nothing on our map that showed those. So don't worry about that if you didn't come up with something. It doesn't necessarily mean that North America doesn't have any plateaus. It just means that none were shown on our topographical map. And what I want to do is just locate these places on the map quickly, and I want to just go by continents. I think you can see a little better if I just do one continent at a time. Okay, we'll start with North America. And for our mountains, the main mountains are the Rocky Mountains in the west and the Appalachian Mountains in the east, where I grew up. For the plains, we have the Great Plains right here to the east of the Rocky Mountains, and no plateaus marked on this particular map. Then for South America, we have the Andes Mountains along the coast, the Amazon Basin, and the Pampas in the south as plains, and we also have the Guiana Highlands and the Brazilian Highlands for plateaus. Okay, then let's move on to Europe. And in Europe, you should have found the Alps. And you also want to put the Urals in with Europe, or you might have put them in with Asia, either one. Okay, for plains, we have the northern European plain, and no plateaus are actually shown on this map of Europe. Let's move on to Africa. You should have located the Atlas Mountains up here in the northwest. The Congo Basin are the plains. That one might have been a little tricky, but those are the plains shown on Africa. And we do have two plateaus, the Ethiopian highlands and also the Katanga Plateau. Then we have, for Asia, 3 mountain ranges, the Tian Shan, the Himalayas, and again, you might have put the Ural Mountains. You might have put them in both Europe and Asia. Now, there are no plains shown on this map, but be aware that there is a Great Northern Plain of China, not shown here. 4 plateaus, oh my, several plateaus shown here, starting with the Central Siberian Plateau, moving on to the Iranian Plateau. These are easy because they have plateau right on them, Plateau of Tibet, and also the Deccan Plateau. Okay, then we have Australia. For our mountains, we have the Great Dividing Range. No plains shown, but there are central lowlands and also a western plateau, which is not labeled on our map. Then Antarctica, pretty easy, wasn't it? There actually are mountains, the Trans-Antarctic Mountains, which are not shown, and then there are no plains and no plateaus shown either. Okay, so that's just a brief overview of what you should have turned up with on your chart, which was part of your assignment. Okay, now we're moving into our lesson today, At the Water's Edge. Now, as we learned previously, landforms are very important to civilization, and each major landform has its advantages and disadvantages. But today we're focusing in on the importance of water and its effect on civilization. Can you think of several important uses of water? Why would people want to locate their city near water? Why is water so important to civilization? Go ahead and pause the program and make a list. All right. You should have been able to come up with several reasons that water is important. Let's go ahead and look at a few that are mentioned from your textbook. First of all, water is needed for survival, and mainly for humans, but also animals have to have water for survival, and of course plants. Vegetation must have plenty of water in order to survive. Of course, we already know that water covers 2/3 of the Earth's surface, but fresh, clean water is needed for survival. Now, let's look back to page 22. This is from a previous section that we looked at, but it's a little diagram of the Earth's fresh and salt water. You can see that over 97% of the Earth's water is actually ocean water, which cannot be used for drinking, and less than 3% is actually fresh water. Of that, most of it, as you can see here, is actually frozen in ice packs and glaciers. And then we have 0.65% is the other. That's where we get our fresh water that we use. And you can see a lot of the fresh water, most of it is groundwater, 62% of it. Then we have 0.09% is freshwater lakes, and streams and rivers account for a mere 1/10,000th of the world's water. So very little. The rest of this, saltwater lakes we can't use. Soil water and vapor aren't necessarily going to come in extremely handy. Of course, people can make wells, to get the groundwater and so on. But we probably normally think of streams and rivers or lakes. Very little of the world's fresh water is found in those areas. Now, we also know that water is needed for transportation. Did you have that on your list? However, of course, water for transportation doesn't need to be clean or fresh, so there's a lot more of that available. For transportation, we have travel. Obviously, that's what we mean by transportation, but also trade It's it's a form of transportation or a reason for transportation. And even communication can fit under this category because the message has to travel. All right, now today it's a lot easier for messages to travel. We talked about that earlier. But before, people had to actually carry a message by hand, back and forth, that type of thing. But water is very helpful in that area. Now, this is a major reason cities have sprung up around waterways because of transportation. And in our age, we have trucks and superhighways, but still, you should understand the importance of the continuing value of rivers and sea routes. Now, mountains and sea routes have both had a major impact on human life, and God created both features, knowing exactly how they would influence human civilization. But transportation costs are a major reason that people who live in the mountains are traditionally poorer than people living near the coast or along a river that is navigable. We talked a little bit before about some of the disadvantages of living in the mountains, but just an example, early settlers in the Appalachian Mountains had difficulty selling their corn. If they shipped overland, and we say shipped, but that would be by a truck, right, to a market on the coast, they couldn't make the same profits as the farmers who shipped by river or sea because the transportation costs of getting that corn over the mountains to the coast ate up all their profits they might have. Because once they get to the coast, they're going to have to sell their corn for the same price as their competitors' corn on the coast. You see, because people aren't going to pay, oh, this is from Kentucky, I'm going to pay an extra $5 for it, you know. Sometimes people pay a little extra if they think it's better quality. But even today, everything that mountain people buy and sell does suffer from this additional transportation cost. Just to give you an idea, here's a little problem for you. Suppose you wanted to ship oil from Mexico to Florida, and you had a choice between a 50,000-ton tanker and a fleet of trucks that could carry 10 tons apiece. Which would cost less in shipping charges? And if you sold the oil for the same price, which method would leave you with more profit? Okay, a little bit of math tells you here that it would take 5,000 trucks to carry the equivalent of one tanker. So obviously the tanker is going to be more cost efficient, resulting in the higher profit. And to make the analogy even more relevant to colonial days, what if you had a sailing ship, but your alternative was just the rutted dirt roads and oxen pulling a cart? Okay, that would make it even more obvious that shipping would be more cost efficient. Besides the fact that our founders had to actually build the roads, they had to, clear the trees out and make those roads, and the rivers and the oceans were already there. The water transportation was already there. They didn't have to create it, so it was definitely an advantage for them. Now we want to move on to the major bodies of water, and those are pretty simple. You probably know them already, and those are our rivers, lakes, and seas. Okay, we've already talked about oceans. So we're going to begin with rivers and some terms that you need to associate with rivers. Some of these would be review, but an important term is tributaries. These are actually rivers that feed other rivers. Okay. Also, you'll see the phrase river system. This is actually the main river and all of its tributaries. So the earth has complex systems of rivers, just like mountain. You can think of mountain ranges. It's got all the different mountains and it's kind of complex. Rivers are the same way. And later, we're going to study the details of some of the most important river and mountain systems. But for now, we want to focus on some other aspects of rivers. You've probably already heard often about the world's longest river. Probably name it just like that, the Nile. And length is probably the most obvious way to compare rivers. Okay. And obviously that's by measuring their length. It sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? And in your textbook on page 26, you have a chart of the longest rivers, and of course there's the Nile at the top of the list, and these are actually ranked by length. Okay, that's how they're ranked, longest starting with the longest and going on down. And you can notice as you scan over the rivers, America's longest river doesn't even make the chart. Okay, so you might be surprised. That's one good thing about studying geography. You find out that, wow, there are a lot of features in the rest of the world that are pretty impressive. A lot of times we think, oh, our stuff is really great. And, of course, we should think that, since this is our nation. But other countries also have some wonderful features about them. However, even when comparing rivers with length, it seems pretty easy. Oh, you just measure it and see how long it is. But there are some different considerations. For example, which tributaries will be included in the measurement. Sometimes it's not always so clear. If you take the Mississippi, for example, it's the world's 12th longest river, but if you look at this map on page 27, if we consider all of the tributaries, wow, that's a lot bigger than we might have thought. This is the Mississippi River Basin. So should the Missouri, this tributary, be included in the length? Should the Missouri's tributaries be included? If so, if we do say, oh, those should be included, that adds another 1,600 miles to the Mississippi, bumping it up to the world's 4th largest river instead of the 12th largest. So you want to keep this in mind as you read from your textbook and maybe different sources that you might come in contact with. You may see the rivers ranked differently. It might be, even according to length, they might be ranked differently. Or you might see them compared in other areas. For example, they might be compared by their discharge. And by this, we mean the flow of water into the ocean. And this is also shown on our longest rivers chart. It's over next to the length discharge, and you can see the Amazon River is really much greater as far as the cubic feet per second that is discharged into the ocean. And that's almost 58 times as much discharge as the Nile. In fact, the discharge of the Amazon is so great that the water remains fresh 200 miles out into the ocean. I found that a pretty amazing fact. Now, another way to compare rivers is by their drainage area or their drainage basin. And this is actually the total land area drained by the main river and its tributaries. And again, you can see this concept on the map here on page 27. The Mississippi River, along with its tributaries, is about 1.25 million square miles. If we include all of this. It makes it the 5th largest drainage basin, but it doesn't appear on our chart because it's not one of the top 10, and that's how our chart was ranked. Okay? Now I'm going to go ahead and look at Activity 2.2, the rivers section, and answer a few questions. Okay? Number 1, which continent has the most rivers on the list, and which continents are not on the list? And a quick glance shows us that Asia has the most rivers, but we're missing Europe, Australia, and Antarctica. Which river has the largest discharge and the least discharge? And here we see under discharge, Amazon is definitely the most, over 6 million, and the Huang He is the least, with just under 53,000. And which river has the second largest discharge in the world? And that is the Congo River, almost 1.5 million cubic feet per second. All right, which river has the largest drainage area and the smallest? Okay, here's our drainage area. Again, the Amazon is at the top, and again, the Huang He is the smallest. And one last question, you're going to have to do a little bit of math on this one. Compare the discharge of the Amazon River to the total discharge of the other 9 rivers. And you probably need to pause the program to figure this one out. All right, I've already got the figuring done here, and we see it's almost 5 million cubic feet per second, but that's still much less than the over 6 million of the Amazon River. All right, now we also want to compare rivers by their navigability. And by this we simply mean their depth, which tells us how far ocean-going vessels can travel on the river. And the Mississippi ranks high with over 15,000 navigable miles, but again, the Amazon is at the top of the list. Other ways to compare rivers include volume of alluvium, and by this measure the Ganges is the muddiest river in the world, the Yangtze the second, and the Mississippi a distant third. Another way to compare rivers is the location of their mouths. For example, the Lena River, although one of the longest, it's number 7, is of very little value because it empties into the Arctic and is covered with ice for half of the year. Now we're quickly going to turn our attention to lakes. And lakes are bodies of water fully enclosed by land. They are important for fish, drinking water, transportation, and of course, recreation. And cities are often located on lakes because of all of these provisions. We're not going to have time to answer our lake questions together, but let's move directly on to our topic of seas. Seas are actually arms of the ocean partially enclosed by land, and they vary greatly in size, and there can even be seas within seas. For example, the 7 seas are actually 7 arms of the Mediterranean. And another important term to associate with seas is harbor. And a harbor is an area of sea along the coast. It's a sheltered body of deep water near the shore, and it's a safe place to load and unload. And good harbors are hard to find and have played an important role in developing civilizations. Can you think of any of America's major cities that have been founded along good harbors? Well, some examples from our map here are Boston, New York, Philadelphia, which is there along the Delaware River, and also Charleston. And the development of these port cities were helpful in the success of the young nation of America. Now, seas in general are safer than the open ocean, and they can also provide safety for areas that's surrounded by them. For example, Japan has never been successfully invaded, and the last time England fell to invaders was, 1066, William the Conqueror? They can also be a disadvantage, though, as when the Vikings could sail in and strike at will along the coast and the rivers in Europe. Now, again, we're not going to have time to get to our seas activity together, but we do want to talk about one more area of water on the Earth's surface that doesn't fit into any of these categories. You may have read about it in the news recently.
This is WFJC, and you're tuned in to today's edition of World Watch. I'm your host, Mark Ward, and today's topics are international business, coping with long-term illnesses, and wetlands. We'll start with wetlands today. There's been a big uproar this week concerning wetlands. They've attracted the attention of the national news. To preserve or not to preserve. And just in case you're still wet behind the ears when it comes to wetlands, I'll give you a few facts to prime the pump for today's discussion. Wetlands are areas of stagnant water like bogs or swamps, which don't fall into either category of being actual bodies of water or dry land. These murky pools form in lowland areas where water can't drain away. Oh, we've already got a caller on the line. Jeff? Hey, Jeff. Welcome to World Watch.
Thanks, Mark. Nice to be on your show.
Glad to have you. I see you're from Florida.
Yeah, that's right. The Florida Everglades.
All right, a wetlands dweller.
Well, I'm a disgruntled wetlands dweller.
Oh, what's the problem?
I bought some property 2 years ago. Prime coastal property to build houses on. You know, a nice subdivision near the beach.
And what happened?
Well, I can't build on it because of the government's regulations. They won't let me clean up the wetlands so I can build on them.
That's a hard blow for Jeff. Sarah from Connecticut, would you like to help us out any?
Sure, Mark. You see, lots of wetlands have been destroyed already. And these areas are natural beauties that we need to enjoy. And they're homes for lots of vegetation and unusual forms of plant life. That's one reason the government's been passing regulations that won't allow property owners to destroy them.
But landowners like Jeff sure has spent an awful lot of money on that property.
Well, laws have been proposed that would provide compensation for property owners for the land that's lost as a result of government regulations.
Is saving the wetlands worth it? Melissa from Iowa, welcome to World Watch.
Thanks, Mark. I listen every day, and it's a pleasure to be on the show.
Glad to have you.
I'd like to point out that there are other valid reasons for cleaning up the wetlands. There are tons of mosquitoes breeding there. They're a menace to man.
Those murky waters are ideal breeding grounds for those pesky critters, all right.
Yes, they've been such a menace that people have tried to drain many wetland areas.
So human health is one reason for cleaning up the wetlands. Thanks, Melissa. Good point. Beauty and vegetation, or mosquitoes and uninhabitable land. You're tuned to WFJC. We'll be right back. Love your cat but tired of his claws? You need Kitty Clipper, a home claw clipping kit that will allow you the pleasure of snuggling with your kitty without painful claw scratches or clothes caught by claws. Kitty Clipper at a store near you. And we're back for more about wetlands. Just want to warn you to be careful next time you're in a swamp. I've just received an email from Josie, a 9th grader who's studying wetlands right now. She says, and I quote, "You may enjoy the large cypress, mangrove, and willow trees, but watch out for the alligators, snakes, and other wild critters that live there." Thanks, Josie, and let's remember that warning next time our kids ask if they can go play in a swamp. They can be mysterious and scary places. Josie also says wetlands are categorized by appearance and vegetation into 3 basic divisions: bogs, marshes, and swamps. Thanks for that great info, Josie. Glad you're listening. Dave from California, welcome to World Watch.
Glad to be here. I'd like to add a little to the discussion about the preservation of wetlands.
Sure, go right ahead.
I'm a lawyer, and I just finished a big case concerning wetland preservation.
Great. Let's hear what you've learned.
In early laws concerning wetlands, they were defined as places where water stands for at least 7 days in the year. Property owners now want this raised to 21 days. The extended time period would give them a greater likelihood of their property not fitting under the definition of a wetland. Maybe Jeff should call his local government to see if there is a bill pending on this issue.
Hope you're still listening, Jeff. Thanks for pointing that out, Dave.
Sure.
And that about wraps it up for wetlands. I'm sure we'll keep hearing about it in the news. We've gotten an inside look at both perspectives. Let's move on to our next topic, a fascinating subject, international business. We'll talk first about the pros and cons for a business deciding whether or not to go international. This is Mark Ward, and you've been listening to World Watch right here on WFJC. We'll be right back.
All right, well, we'll skip this section on international business, but let's go ahead and review what we have picked up about wetlands. First of all, they are areas of stagnant water, places where water stands at least 7 days in the year, and they have plenty of insects, particularly mosquitoes. But wetlands also perform several useful functions that might not be noticed at first glance. For example, they aid in water storage and flood control, they filter pollution, and they're believed to be the nursery for most of the world's food chain. And as we learned from Josie, there are different classifications of wetlands. And the basic ones are bogs, marshes, and swamps. And you want to be sure to read that section in your textbook because one of your goals is to be able to distinguish between among the 3 types of wetlands, all right? And you might even want to include one of those in your Geography Island project. For your assignment today, read pages 26 through 30, section review page 31, activity 2.1, numbers 2, 3, 4, and 8, and activity 2.2, complete the section on lakes and seas. Our Where in the World question, where is the longest coral reef? The Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia is the world's longest. And for next time, where do only 2 flowering plants grow?